أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القاعلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وأحلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان ولعن الله أعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your amal inshallah as we make our way through the month of Ramadan. May He forgive our sins and may He allow us now to travel through the various levels of fasting. Last night, we reached a very pinnacle point and a very important point in our discussion where we were able to now, after 7 days, identify that the divine worldview is that worldview that fulfills all of my innate desires inside of me. Nothing is left unfulfilled. There is no imperfections. There is no limits. We accept this divine worldview as a worldview that the internal kingdom of mine wants and desires, And one point I want to make here before we move on now to class number 7, alhamdulillah, and that is that, as I said last night, and I really kind of want to focus on this as we move forward, is that this journey is very specific to the individual. And I like to truly believe that everything that we've talked about for the past 7 classes all exists inside every single one of you. This is not new information. This is not something that is unveiling for all of you. It's already and always been there inside of you. However, sometimes this dunya and this world, its distractions, its tragedies, its hardships, its difficulties come in and they veil those realities. They play with our emotions. They pull on our heartstrings. In the process now, they end up making us believe things that simply don't make sense to the intellect. When that emotion now is high, when that emotion becomes a controlling factor inside our internal kingdom, everything else gets veiled, including those principles and those tools, i.e. the intellect, the rationale, logic. They take a backseat to that emotion, okay? I've seen individuals, lose their mother, let's say, for example, or go through a nasty divorce, or God forbid, a tragic loss of their children. And I've seen that, have 2 different impacts. One impact is that their faith gets stronger and that, they drown themselves in God. The other one is that they take a backseat in God or backseat in this whole idea of faith and religion, only because the belief is sometimes, and it's incorrect, but I don't blame people for this belief, is that if I do believe in this divine worldview, it should come with some sense of contentment, serenity, and the misconception is that the deeper I go into this divine worldview, the more calming my life should be in this world. And nobody ever stopped to tell these people or myself when I have those kind of thoughts, is that the dunya was meant, this world that we live in right now, this temporal abode was meant to test us. It was meant to distract us. It was meant to filter us out. It does its job beautifully. Its tests, its tragedy, its struggles, its hardships. It's not bias. If you lost your mom to a sickness, then your neighbor also lost their parent to sickness. If you had to bury your own children, then perhaps the Hindu, the Christian, the atheist down the road also might have to bury their child with their own hands. And that's just the nature of this world. When that emotion subsides and the intellect takes its proper place, then the veils slowly but surely are removed. So if you are at a moment now where you are at a difficult place in life, meaning that it's been a tough year, a tough personal year for you, past 6 months, past year, and right now everything I'm saying to you, it just doesn't resonate. I don't want to hear it. I'm sitting here because my parents are forcing me. I'm sitting here because let's give it a chance. But it's really not. That's okay. That's okay. I think that initially you need to heal the wound. To heal the wound, you have to first acknowledge there's a knife in my back, right? If somebody stabbed me with a knife in my back, before I even touch the scar, I have to first acknowledge, or the doctor does, that there's a knife in this guy's back. If he comes in and says, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you, you can leave now, I'll say, look, there's a knife in my back. Can you at least acknowledge the knife in my back? Take out the knife and then heal the wound, right? So a lot of you some of you need to maybe perhaps go through a healing process, whatever that is, right? Forgiveness, emotional intelligence. The example I give often is, and then we'll move on to our slides today, is that, people who like to sleep in complete darkness. There are some people who like every single light off in their room. They even have these blackout curtains that are very thick that block out any sort of instance of the sun. So their room is literally pitch black. They can't see their hand in front of their face when they sleep. And I want you to imagine at 3 o'clock in the morning now, in the deep part of their sleep, they're sunk into their bed now. They've reached that REM cycle of sleep now where they're dreaming and they can't hear anything. Somebody comes in and places a very, very high, or shines a very high light in their face, or shines a flashlight right in their face. Would they like it? No, of course not. They would be annoyed by it. What are you doing? Are you okay? Even though the light is supposed to be light, it's supposed to illuminate everything. It's supposed to bring about, this idea that what is unknown becomes known by lights. Nur, light, all these things are, in essence, a very positive thing, right? But for that moment, for that person now who's sitting in darkness, the last thing they want is this bright light in their face, right? So these discussions are supposed to be illuminating for us. But if we're in a place of darkness right now, I don't want to hear Asad Jafri right now talk about this stuff. It doesn't heal my wounds, and you're right, it doesn't heal your wounds. But at least it lets you know that when the wounds are healed, all of this beauty now is waiting for you, right? So maybe instead of shining a huge flashlight in your face, if for those of you who are healing from tragedy, maybe you can use it as a dimmer lights, where you slowly but surely now dim the light open. And if you start off with a very, very low dim now, and then you pray to God that give me the power to turn that dim a little bit higher, then so be it. If right now you're at the lowest dim, that's fine. That's okay. The world's not passing you by. Don't feel guilty. God's not angry with you. You're simply trying to go through a process of trying to figure out why I feel this way, or how to somehow manage or cope with or understand the tragedy or the life that right now I'm going through, right? Take the example from the universe of God. When you wake up, as the sun rises, it rises literally inch by inch, second by second, right? The sun does not simply appear in the sun. All of a sudden it goes from darkness to absolute light. No, slowly but surely the gradual rising of the sun, allows everything else to get ready for the lights, right? We also have to sometimes allow the gradual entry into our system of light be just that, be gradual, be dimming. It's not an on-off switch. It never was, right? So, as much as these things make complete sense, they're intellectual, they're logical, maybe right now we're not open for that. Maybe we're sitting in dark, and that's okay. So let's attempt now to use this month of Ramadan as the month of healing. Identify the wounds, talk it out. Your triggers and those things are not there anymore. You can't binge eat and binge watch during the daytime. We don't want to in the month of Ramadan, which means that we're forced to deal with those emotions, those tragedies that we have buried inside of us for so long. So, embrace your path, go at your pace. This stuff is always there. It's always going to be there. And it's not outside of you. It is inside of you. Everything I talked about for the past 7 classes is where, guys? Inside of you. Okay? You don't have to go here and there, buy this or purchase that or move here. No. If we stop and kind of face the reality inwards, all these things will begin to make sense, inshallah. I just had to say that. I'm sorry. Okay? So let's go ahead and share my screen, and let's get started, inshallah. So as I mentioned last night, we came to a conclusion last night that through a series of concluding intellectual statements that the divine worldview is one that satisfies all of my innate needs. And I mentioned in a very important statement last night that if we believe in a worldview that does not fulfill all my innate needs, eventually that worldview will become lost, it become weak, it become impractical, and then we'll move on to another worldview. And we don't want that, inshallah, right? We want to be able to go ahead and cultivate this worldview throughout our life, inshallah. Okay, let's get to my slide, and we shall begin. Okay, so now we've entered that divine worldview. Now, the second half of my lecture series, with the exception of Friday's discussion, which is the majlis of Bibi Khadija, salamullah alayha, and then of course the suggestion of Imam Mujtaba next week. I think I have about 9, 11, 12, 13, about 4 or 5 discussions left to now delve into this divine worldview, okay? Which means, just to kind of give you the roadmap now, what this highway looks like is that tonight we'll talk about, why do I need to study this, Asad Bhai? Okay, fine, I get it, there's a divine worldview, but what does it bring to my life, number one? Number two, then we talk about the ways of knowing what is the fundamental principle of a divine worldview, being the existence of God, of a belief in that entity that's metaphysical in nature and that is eternal, okay? So we will talk about the proof of God. We'll talk about how we should know God, the proof of God. 2 main proofs we'll discuss. And if we have time, and hopefully we will, we'll talk about the attributes of that God, okay? And this is now where we begin now to slowly but surely include all those other theories of knowledge in the discussion on epistemology that we had said at that moment was not relevant. Meaning now we can, to kind of fortify the strength in God, is we can use our empirical knowledge. We can use our senses, our eyes, our ears, to look and to hear at the signs and the ayat of Allah. We can use now tradition and scripture to fortify a belief that's already there. Now we've entered the divine worldview, right? We're here now. We're here. This is now the divine worldview room. Looks pretty nice. Now we can use every theory of knowledge at our disposal to fortify and strengthen that belief. But not before that, guys, right? Not before that, okay? And as always, I look forward to your questions at 6:45 Eastern, inshallah, which is about 20 minutes from now, okay? So benefits of studying this principle now, okay? So why do I need to study the existence of God, okay? What does it bring to my life? Number one is that it fulfills the fitrat. Remember, and I just want to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about the fitrat, talking about the innate nature. The first thing we have to realize is that with creation, it's bundled with creation, meaning what? That it comes pre-packaged inside of the human being. The example I gave you is if you buy a brand new smartphone, it already has an operating system attached to it. If you buy, I don't know, a PC, a laptop, whatever the case, a Mac, whatever you want to buy, it already has something pre-loaded on there, okay? It's not a blank screen. It's not asking you now to install the software. It's already on there. Yes, updates are required throughout, right? Our phone tells us it's time for an update, we update, right? But that pre-existing software was there when the phone arrived at my home. Similarly, when we enter into this world, we have a pre-package already called the fitrat. Every single human being does, right? Those absolute truths that we talk about in philosophy. Everything as low as every human being feels hunger, every single human being feels thirsty. One of the main examples used in a lot of the books of theology is the love that a mother has for her child, right? That is called fitri love. It's innate love. Nobody teaches a mother, make sure you love your child, right? And that is universal across the board. So how can we prove something is fitri? Is when it is seen as a universal concept within humanity. So the love that a parent or if I can use specifically the mother has for her child is a universal concept. You pick up a mother from Toronto, from New Jersey, from Tehran, from, I don't know, from Tanzania, from Australia, from Europe, put them all together in one room, all of them will have love for their child. Expression of love might differ between mothers, but the existence of love is there. That existence is what? Is fitri. It's innate. Okay. The other major one that we have sometimes is the need for justice, right? Right now, we're looking at the world today, from Yemen to Bahrain to Syria to China to Kashmir to you name it. Even issues right now in your country. The George Floyd verdict, brought about such an immense reaction, from everybody across the board. Those, who share the same color as him, and those who had no vested interest at all, right? Only because it was a symbolic representation of a fitri need we have for justice. That when we do see, for example, him being, guilty in all three verdicts, we feel like that's a victory for justice, and that's an innate victory for us. Okay. The reason why sometimes those who go hungry and thirsty, it really touches our sensitive bone, was because we know how it is to be hungry and thirsty. Part of the reason why Allah prescribed fasting for us was to feel the pain of those who are hungry and thirsty, right? So those things are fitri, guys, okay? Again, I could talk about many more things, like the need for companionship, okay? As much as sometimes we want to be in isolation, we want to be left alone, we want our me time, that doesn't last very long, right? An escape from the family, from the husband, from the wife, from everybody else. I just need my day to myself. That's a day to yourself. But overall, we as human beings, we crave and we need companionship, be it in the form of a marriage and a family, or be it in the form of friendship or social circle, whatever the case may be, right? That's why one of the things that have increased now, unfortunately, in this era of this pandemic, is mental health and mental health awareness, because there are many people who have fallen into the abyss of depression and anxiety only because they don't have that social fix, on a day-to-day basis that they usually have. So the fitrat is universal, guys. It can't be taught, it can't be learned, and it doesn't turn off. Okay, it's either on a low dim or a high dim. It's either exaggerated in terms of it flourishing, or it is diminished, right? But it's there. You might have the lowest version of the software possible inside of your phone, but your phone isn't void of a software that's been pre-installed. Okay, so long as we exist in this world, we have these fitri needs. Now, there might be people who deny those needs. There might be people who choose to be a hermit, or choose to live on top of a mountain, or in a cave. Or there might be people who choose to quiet their justice down for the sake of their greed. Right? Many things can happen. Right? The fitna needs to be strengthened. It can easily now, if we don't exercise, it's like a muscle, right? If we don't strengthen it, it can easily now break, collapse, but it's still there. A broken bone is still a bone in your body. Right? It's not removed from your body. It's just broken. That's all. So it renders your arm, your leg, whatever you broke, to be completely what? Useless, right? So a lot of you will ask, well, what about people who are doing injustice? Well, those are people who have chosen a conscious decision to allow their greed and their desire and their anger and their all their evil satanic principles to overtake their fitrat. Then there are those people who place themselves in very uncomfortable positions, all for a fight of justice. There are those who fight to ensure that their circle of influence and their circle of companionship is strong, right? So they'll spend thousands of dollars on marriage counseling. I don't want to get divorced. I don't want to, I don't want to be alone, or this is a very important system of companionship for me. So I'm going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that it is going to work for me. So, and one of the ones that we have seen, one of the strongest ones we've seen throughout history is the God gene. And I talked about that already in our discussion on, the drive to investigate religion, class number 3, I believe. And so when we fulfill that fitrat, then of course, it becomes we become more human, if that makes sense. Okay, those fitri principles have been placed inside of us to be fulfilled. Okay, to be fulfilled. Number one. Number two is the need to know. Okay, with the study of the principle of the existence of God, the main principle, the fundamental principle by which the divine worldview is built on, we actually end up knowing a lot. With God comes a revelation of sorts, where in terms of where we come from, what are we doing here, where we're going, all of that now comes packaged together beautifully with the discussion on the existence of God. Okay? Part of the proof of God that we use dates all the way back to the origin of this universe, right? That's fundamentally where the discussion and the proof begins, is that, okay, this is where, this is where we start our proof of God. Yes, the day-to-day maintenance and the day-to-day running of the universe also, of course, requires an entity per se, but really it dates all the way back to our origin. Number one. Number two is need to know. Number three is, and again, we fulfilled that need for perfection and the unlimited, right? As we move forward now in opening up this discussion on God, we understand the perfection of Him, of God, and we also understand the unlimited nature of God. Remember my slide from last night, the three principles of both the materialist worldview and the divine worldview. Okay, divine worldview is, like I said, immaterial in nature or metaphysical in nature, relies on the intellect, and of course is spiritual in nature. All three of them are unlimited in their sheer definition. Okay, that alone now fulfills the need for unlimited. And of course, later on we'll understand that with an imperfect God, there's a lot of problems. With a perfect God, everything else can kind of, run smoothly. But and these are things that we already discussed. What I really want to focus on is 4 and 5. Okay, so oftentimes I wonder, and I'm going to shy away from bombarding you with verses and our hadiths. I feel like some people just kind of, they tune me out when I say verses of the Quran or the ahadith. Right now, perhaps we're not needing for this. Later on, when we kind of get deep into the discussion on God, yes, I will use some, fortifying, strengthening, accompanying ahadith and verses. But right now, this has to continue to be an intellectual and a logical discussion within. Not that those are not logical, but those are traditional and naqli theories of knowledge. Let's stick with the aqli and intellectual theory of knowledge for now. Hope and serenity, okay? Again, let me take you through the discussion on a person who has faced tragedy, and a person, two people who have faced tragedy, okay? One is one who believes in a divine worldview, one is who rejects a divine worldview. Okay. Let's say a loss of a loved one, a tragic death. Okay, that seems to be sometimes, a debilitating tragedy to go through. We've all gone through our tragedies, and how one reacts to it, I think, is quite relevant to the worldview that they belong to. I oftentimes wonder to myself, how do people who don't believe in God get through their tragedy? Where do they park the anger? How do they go through the grieving process, the multiple steps of denial and anger and grief and acceptance and all that? And how do they come to grips in terms of what happened, why it happened, where did it happen, where is my loved one, where did he go, blah, 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 or where did she go? And so, when you have a divine worldview and the principle of God is inside of you, that becomes your medication. It becomes your outlet. It becomes your counseling session. If that God is presented properly, I will take this for as long as I can. I believe that if today's youth, even today's elders now, if there are people who don't have a fundamentally sound belief in God, it's only because it hasn't been presented to them properly. Or it's been presented to them to be, look, either believe in this or burn in hell, right? And that's, after a while, you simply don't want to accept that ultimatum. So there has to be a third or fourth or fifth option, right? And you think about those people who have an atheist or a materialistic worldview. When tragedy hits, what do? Usually they go to numbing devices, alcohol, gambling, drugs, or they don't handle the emotion properly. Yes, they go through counseling. They might go through grief counseling, but it doesn't answer a lot of the fundamental questions. And those questions left unanswered will fester and will kind of grow inside your mind to the point where, it could have some damage on you. On top of that, we are individuals, as I mentioned, who seek perfection. We seek perfection from ourselves as well. Think about the level of regret and guilt you have, and the amount of times that we beat ourselves up over mistakes that we make, guys, sins that we commit, errors that we commit. Um, dare I say, we are harder on ourselves than God is sometimes. God's quick to forgive. Ya Sari al-Rida. He's very easily pleased. The problem was never him. The problem was us and our, these false truths that we have inside of us. Okay, we assume, right? Falsely assume truths. We assume that God doesn't want to forgive me. God hasn't forgiven me. God's not happy with me. God doesn't want my worship. Or we say things that to me are absurd, that I'm not religious. That to me is always the best one. I'm not religious, Maulana. I'm not like you. मैं इतना दीनदार नहीं हूं, Maulana. Right? Those kind of words I find shocking, because those kind of people who have convinced themselves that they're not very religious are people who serve humanity, people who donate to causes, people who sponsor orphans, people who work very hard to feed their families and put a roof over their head, right? People who are great with their families in terms of their etiquette and their akhlaq, love their children, treat their spouse very well. Those are all things that are godly, by the way. We have kind of limited the definition of godly to certain acts of worship, and that's it. No, to be a human being is to be godly. Okay, to open a door for somebody, for example, to say thank you, to greet them with a smile, those are all risk, right? That's all sustenance given from you to somebody else, right? So these are, falsely assumed truths that we have to kind of trim from our system. Okay. With the study of the principle of the divine worldview being God, an immense amount of hope and comfort comes into our life. If we understand God properly, if God's been introduced as a God of fear, a God of punishment, a God of squeezing of the grave, a God of lashing, a God of the hellfire, then yes, of course, there's fear and there's resentment, and we become jaded, we become angry, right? Or worse yet, we look at others who might represent the religion or represent God in society, the leaders, the speakers, the ulama, the elders in our community, the ones who are quote unquote the religious ones, and we look at their behavior, and if that behavior is horrible, then I think that's why I don't believe in religion. Look at this person, judgmental, ignorant, horrible, yelling and screaming, right? Look at him, he can't even keep himself proper. So there's a number of factors, right? I talked about, that discussion how with the youth one day, how, at 23, 24, he has this built-in anger and resentment towards religion, towards God, really. And he was very bold in telling me that. I mean, he was hesitant, but if you create a comfort and safe zone for these kids, they'll tell you everything that's inside. I resent God. That was his word. I resent God. Period. This is a Shia Sayyid kid, right? And when and with the boldness that he said that with, and I didn't lash out. I mean, I let him kind of get it out, but he brought up things that were, that were not fair to God, right? A horrible grade 4 dinyat Sunday school teacher, an alim or a sheikh that gave him a horrible answer, for example, right? Him being judged by quote unquote the religious police in our centers, right? Asking for a dua without it ever being answered, watching his mother wither away from cancer, right? Watching evil in this world, right? All of these 5-6 things now result in the idea that these 5 or 6 people and things and events all represent who? God. So they're off, they're wrong, they're negative. So God must be off and negative. I don't like these 6 things, thus I don't like God, right? So again, a proper understanding of God, which is really my purpose now. I will not leave you, inshallah, God gives me life to do it. Well, I will not leave you until I present to you not my version of God, the divine worldview's version of God. Okay? And then with that comes hope. You understand how loving and forgiving and merciful the God is that I want to present to all of you. You understand how serene it must be for a true believer to believe in a true version of God. Okay? And the last one is providing a purpose. Okay? Providing a purpose. The divine worldview, the cultivating of it, the strengthening of it, the maintenance of, remember my worldview slide. Okay? You know, hopefully you have these things memorized now. Yeah, right. Maybe you do. The worldview it affects 6 different dimensions inside of us: reason, intellect, right? Thought and knowledge, comprehension and action. And these 6 down go back and they cultivate that worldview. As these 6 things increase and strengthen, it in turn, of course, increases the worldview. Okay, when that, you know, when we see our life as the cultivation of that worldview for the first 4 things on your screen, then that ultimately becomes my purpose in life. My purpose in life becomes God, becomes the fundamental principle of a divine worldview. If that base is not there, then everything doesn't make sense. You know, I get questions about the fact that why do we pray, Maulana? Why do we fast? Why do we have to do this? Why do we? And a lot of them are answered when the base of God makes sense. Okay? When the base of God makes sense, everything else makes sense. When your purpose makes sense, when the GPS destination in your app is God, God, every route that you take will lead you back to that purpose. Some routes are bumpy, some routes are paved, some routes are beautiful, scenic, some routes are just tumbleweed, nothing, right? Like, I'll never forget my drive from Toronto to Phoenix, Arizona. It's a long drive. All the way, I went across the US, all the way down south. And there were moments where breathtaking scenery. There were moments where for miles and miles and miles, I looked around, there was no sign of life. Maybe one cactus, you know, every 20 to 30 miles. Okay. Sometimes the roads ahead had massive potholes. Sometimes it was a beautiful paved road. Sometimes it was, you know, a 75 mile per hour zone for my Americans, and sometimes it was a 40 mile per hour zone. But every one of those different paths and journeys led to what? Led to my destination. I had to go through that to get to my destination, right? But that only makes sense. We only accept every journey when what? When the destination makes sense, guys. So now when I have a base of God inside of me, I know that my purpose is to maintain, uphold, strengthen this worldview, and the base principle of that worldview is God. That becomes my purpose. A lot of you have asked me questions about purpose. Now your purpose is to strengthen this divine worldview, because there are forces today in this worldview, in this day and age, in this dunya, that will look to strip you of your divine worldview. Mock the belief in God. Mock those who are religious. You look at even sometimes in the media, the way the religious ones are depicted in sometimes today's sitcoms and sometimes today's cartoons and today's shows and blah blah blah, right? The characters of the Ned Flanders of the world and other characters that are just the butt of all the jokes inside. You look at shows like South Park, for example, how they depict Jesus and how they depict God and this and that. You know, it's all, you know, sort of like comical and, you know, it's all the genre there, but there is a hidden message in there, right? And sometimes our kids have this inferiority complex because of that reason, the way it's depicted in society. So your job, my job, our purpose is to strengthen it, to fight off the demons, and to continue trekking in our journey to get to our purpose. Okay, guys? So these 5 things now are the benefits of studying this principle. I thought this slide was important before we actually begin to study that tomorrow night. Okay? So inshallah, if you have any questions about that, of course, as always, Mutahar, I'm assuming is waiting for us. It is 6:45 on the dot, so I'm going to stop here and open up the floor for any questions you may have. Assalamu alaikum, Mutahar bhai.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, how are you, Maulana?
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much.
Oh, mashallah, Maulana, it looks like people are really getting into this, getting some excellent questions here.
Amazing.
So let's get going with this. I think brother is writing here right now, but let me start with this one first. So the first question, Maulana, from the previous lectures, not from tonight.
Sure.
Okay, so our innate inclination is to attain perfection and be unlimited, right? But we are limited and imperfect. And so is this materialistic world we live in. So this is the question now. So if we are created imperfect and limited, then how is it possible to achieve perfection? And if it is not possible, then what's the point of divine religion?
Right, beautiful question. So, first of all, you're right. We live in a world that's imperfect and limited. That's why this world is simply a stepping stone. Number one, it's a tool. Okay, it's a bridge to cross across one land from another. Okay, and the ones who have taken this world to be the end all and be all are the ones who have failed. Essentially, the ones who have lived in this world, taken from what it wants and moves on, are the ones who are successful. Okay, part of the process of us reaching perfection and the unlimited is that we have to use the proper tools accordingly. Imam Rada alayhi salam has a beautiful hadith. He says that this world is a bridge and you don't build homes on bridges.
Mm.
You don't settle on a bridge. And this world isn't a place to be settled in. Yes, we build our life, we build our world, right? We do it for a purpose, and that purpose is something grander and bigger than this world can ever imagine. So, this reference to the dunya is meant to constantly tell us that this is nothing but a perishing temporal world that we have to now use what we need to. I mean, it has its ahmiyat and importance, but as the means, not as the end. That's point number one. Point number two is, remember, in us discovering our unlimited, for us to reach the unlimited, it means for us to identify the true unlimited in this universe.
Mm.
Okay, with a capital U. Of course, now we know I can refer to him now as God, right? Once we identify that God within us, then we drown ourselves in that. We worship that to the point where there are levels of spirituality, and it's a little bit outside the scope of my discussion. But if this was a class on irfan or mysticism, there is a level now where the abd now drowns himself in the Mawla, where the servant now drowns himself inside of the master, to the point where as he himself says, Allah himself says, that when you do that, then I become your hands, I become your ears, I become your eyes, I become your tongue, I become your face, right? Now, this fadilat that we have for Imam Ali, that he's Ainullah, Yadullah, Wajhullah, Lisanullah, that sometimes the Wahhabis go crazy about. The see, these guys are mushriks. But they don't understand. There is this irfani pahlu. There is this mystic dimension to it, where everything he saw God. Everything he reached for God. Everything he spoke of God. So literally, God says, "I become your tongue. I become your eyes. I become your hands. I become your face." You no longer have any sort of identity for yourself. You've drowned yourself into, it's like you it's a horrible example, I'm sorry. You're making a cup of tea, for example, and you put a glass of you put some sugar in there and you mix it up, right? Now extract that sugar from there. You can't. It's part of the chai, right? Same way, we have to horrible example, we have to drown ourselves into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where now they have fana fillah, right? We become fani, we become perishing into this eternal abode. So the unlimited is not for us to become ma'soom.
Yeah.
Like we have this idea of infallible. The perfection and the unlimited is that the more that we strengthen this divine worldview, the more perfect we become. It's a process. It's not a stamped, it's not an absolute reality, right? Maybe one day, someday, I think maybe in this series, I'll define what it means to be a perfect human being in one class. I think that seems to be a little bit of confusion. I think that when I say perfect, I think you guys think I mean sinless or errorless or ma'soom. No, not at all. Not even close. We were created to be weak and limited. خُلُقَ الْإِنسَانَ ضَعِيفًا خُلُقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَجَلٍ. Open verse of the Quran. Man has been created to be weak. The human was created to be haste. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done is that He has placed now connectors inside of our life to take the reality of our creation and the purpose of our creation and somehow now bring them as close as possible. Connectors, for example, prophets and imams and parents and ulama and the Quran and our conscience, all these things are placed in there. Our murabbi, our nurturers, to bridge this gap. Okay? So everybody will be judged, quote unquote. I don't like that word, but judged, quote unquote, based on on their capacity, as I mentioned last night, right? So the divine worldviews now present to you those tools that is made to bridge this gap between those elements inside of us that will push us away from from perfection and our actual purpose being perfection itself. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, perfect. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Mark. It's more about striving than just being perfect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not we will never get to a point. If we're 105 years old, we'll always be striving until our last breath. Right? Then what's the point? The point is the process. The point is the journey. Okay? The point is the means. Allah will take care of the end, but we have to embrace the means, inshallah.
SubhanAllah. Thank you so much, man. That was a great answer there. I think this is a related question here. In one of the classes, you mentioned that in quest of right worldview, man's innate need for perfection must be coupled with his detest for limits.
Correct.
Does this mean we cannot enjoy this worldly life if we
No.
want perfection?
No, of course not. We can absolutely enjoy this worldly life, provided that we respect the limits of the unlimited. Okay? There's a beautiful hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, "Ma yas'adu ahadan hatta bi'iqamati hududillah." Oh, please understand, right? He says that an individual will never reach the level of sa'id. Sa'id means what? Sa'ada is happiness, true happiness in Islam. There's a whole discussion on what happiness is, right? It's not a zahiri happiness. It's actually internal. He says you will not reach that true happiness hatta bi'iqamati hududillah, until you establish the limits of God. Okay? So which means that you live within the Sharia of Allah. And of course, Allah has allowed, halal pleasure, halal entertainment. Allah has told you to go out and enjoy yourself, surround yourself, be social, but within the confines of the Sharia. Now, you'll ask me, wait a second now, Sabhai, you said that we don't like limits, right? And, we may not like limits, but what overrides that limits is the fact that it's coming from the unlimited. I've now identified, after 7 classes, identified that unlimited, the capital U now being God, that unlimited is the appropriate and the only unlimited in this universe. Nothing else can claim to be unlimited except for God. Now, whatever limits come from Him, I close my eyes and I accept. If I live within those limits, happy moments, sad moments, then absolutely I can enjoy this world. Again, Nabi Sulaiman had a kingdom. Imam Ali had so much wealth that he said at one moment in his life, I could feed all of the Bani Hashim twice if I wanted to, right? Prophet Yusuf, right? Again, a king, the king of Egypt. All these things are there. So, as long as we are able now to bi'iqamati hududillah, right? Establish ourselves within the limits of the Sharia, we will reach that level of sa'id. Even in this miserable, limited world, we'll reach a certain level of happiness. Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you. Now, this question is from our youngster.
How do you know, by the way? Did they tell you that I'm a youngster?
The name on it. Her name is Sana.
You know the names. Okay.
Yes, mashallah. It's a good question from Sana. She's using her dad's phone to ask this question.
Mashallah.
That's good kids are getting involved, mashallah. So she is asking, when you listed great humanitarian qualities as being religious, then why the need to prioritize ibadat? Let me finish the question too. And then she asked, is it then sufficient for me to be a humanitarian because that is religious, right?
Yes. So that's a great question. And they're not exclusive to each other. It doesn't mean that so long as you're a human being, you don't need to worship. And if you worship, you don't need to be a human being. So, there's no connection between the two. However, my question is that this sense of goodness you have inside of you, where does that sense of goodness come? Number one, what drives you to open the door for somebody? What drives you to say thank you? What drives you to cook iftar and drop it off at somebody's house, or drop off a box of dates, or send a message, or, so now we believe that those things come from our creator, right? The unlimited now, right? And so if that's the case, then we want to make sure that in our form of worship, we continue to cultivate that relationship with that unlimited, so he continues to inspire us to do good. Okay? So the goodness that we have inside of us comes from the source of our worship. We worship him more, that source inside of us strengthens, right? And you'll counter that by saying, well, atheists do good, they do good. But the goodness of an atheist and the goodness of a God-fearing individual, Zamina Asman, as you say in Urdu, there's a huge difference. And very, very quickly, I'll tell you what the difference is. In atheism, in the one who accepts the materialistic worldview, and please follow my point very carefully here, is that their goodness and their morality is all zahir. It's all apparent, right? So if, for example, if they dig a well, if they open up an orphanage, if they donate to a wing of a hospital and they have their name on it, that's a great act and that will be rewarded. However, God wants to reward him in this world, in that world, I don't know, whatever the case may be. But until that act of good has an outward form to it, it's not accepted in the atheist world. For example, he wakes up one day, thinks, you know what, I want to, for example, go to the shelter today and help feed the homeless. Great intention. He gets busy, he sleeps in, it closes, it doesn't happen. Is that a good act in this world? No, it didn't manifest itself in the outward world. So it becomes a rejected act of good. So morality in the atheist world is highly limited to it actually manifesting to something in the external. Him hopping in a car, driving to the soup kitchen and pouring soup inside of a bowl for a homeless person. Then he's done a good act. But in the world of the divine worldview, if you wake up one day, say, you know what, I'm going to cook iftar and drop it off to my friend's house because they're sick, and you don't get to it, you'll still be considered to be a good act, because the divine worldview looks at those things that are just not apparent but also hidden as well. So your sense of goodness and morality travels way beyond the apparent, actually also goes within the hidden as well. So that's why we have that even a good intention, not manifested into action, still will reap the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in the eyes of the atheist, she has to dig the well, sponsor the orphan, click on pay now, have his name on the wing for it to actually be counted. Even then, the intention comes into play. Why'd you do it? This and that. All these things are a factor. That's a great question. I'm happy she asked.
Great. Thank you, Sana. That was very nice. I'm glad kids are participating as well.
Yeah, beautiful. That's very inspiring.
One last question, Maulana, and then we'll finish, inshallah.
Sure.
So it's a pretty straightforward question. Can you please clarify what is mystical or Shahudi epistemology?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm happy somebody asked. So again, there are some things that people see in dreams. There are people who sometimes see visions, right? Now that's a different discussion on what does that mean, this and that. Sometimes people see things in certain objects that I don't see. I look up to the sky. I see clouds, right? My kids might see, I don't know, they might see a unicorn, a horse. They might see, I don't know, Allah. They might see, all these things written out in the clouds. Okay, that's their shahudi. They're witnessing it. They're seeing it. Or the dreams they see. I saw a dream, let's say, for example, of the Prophet of Allah doing this act, or what looked like a nurani, a personality coming to me, telling me to do this. Okay, if somebody comes in your dream and they have this light on their face and they tell you believe in God, right? And you don't believe in God properly, then that's not a theory of knowledge that can be used. Simply because, number one is that usually when you witness those things in that state of consciousness, then the interpretation for those things lack details, number one. Number two is that it usually, when you attempt not to describe that to somebody else, you're bound to lose out in a lot of what happened, right? Again, I go back, I simplify things. Ask yourself the last time you had a very vivid dream and you attempted to tell your family about that dream. I will guarantee you that almost half of that dream, if not a little bit more, was missing. You couldn't figure out, what they were wearing. So those details that we need now, okay, are not there. To use this somewhat shaky experience to define our worldview, given now what we know, what affects that worldview, is too risky and not acceptable. You can't use a dream of something that you can't describe to now control your epistemology on this side. Remember, the reason, the thought, and the comprehension, and your ideology now, your aql, your ilm, and your amal, right? Your intellect, your knowledge, and your action. So that's why at this moment now your shahudi is not accepted. Okay, later on it might be, but at this stage now what we're doing, it won't be accepted.
Great. Thank you so much, Maulana. Thanks so much for great.
Thank you. May Allah bless you all. Thank you very much.
I'll see you tomorrow at 6:50.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.